It felt like a betrayal, a deep wound that cut right to my core. That night, I didn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying memories in my head, each one now tainted by the knowledge that they were gone. Sold for a profit. The pain was unbearable. That's when I knew I couldn't just let it go. I had to do something. Hi, I'm Chloe Vance. I just turned 30, and honestly, things are a little complicated right now. You could even say there's a giant wall between me and my parents. And I'm not just talking about a figurative wall, like when you have a fight and don't talk for a while. I mean a real, honest-to-goodness, made-of-concrete wall. It's big. Really big. It all started with my childhood home. The place where I learned to ride my bike, had birthday parties with all my friends, and spent countless hours climbing the old oak tree in the backyard. That house meant everything to me. It was more than just bricks and mortar, it was filled with memories, laughter, and love. Or, at least, I thought it was. My parents, John and Rebecca, they're usually pretty good people. We've always been a close family. Sunday dinners, holiday traditions, the whole 9 yards. That's why what they did, well, it hit me like a ton of bricks. You see, they sold the house. Not just sold it, but sold it without even telling me. I found out online, scrolling through real estate listings, when I saw a familiar picture. Our house. With a big, red sold banner slapped across the front. That's when I knew I had to do something. Something big. Something, well, you'll see. It involves a plot of land, a very determined daughter, and a whole lot of concrete. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine sunshine streaming through the kitchen window, the smell of Mom's chocolate chip cookies baking in the oven, and the sound of Dad's slightly off-key singing while he mowed the lawn. That was my childhood. Our house was a 2-story, blue Victorian with a big, wraparound porch. We had a tire swing hanging from the oak tree, which Dad had put up when I was just 5 years old. I spent hours swinging so high I thought I could touch the clouds. Summer nights were filled with fireflies and the sound of crickets chirping, and we'd all sit on the porch, drinking lemonade and telling stories. Inside, the house was just as cozy. Mom always made sure it felt like home. There were family photos everywhere, mismatched but comfortable furniture, and a bookshelf overflowing with my favorite stories. The attic was a magical place, filled with old toys, forgotten treasures, and dusty trunks holding family secrets. I remember one Christmas, Dad dressed up as Santa and almost tripped over the coffee table. We laughed so hard our stomachs hurt. Another time, Mom helped me build a fort in the living room out of blankets and pillows. We spent the whole day in there, reading books and pretending to be explorers. Those memories, those feelings, they're all tied to that house. It wasn't just a building, it was a part of me. It was where I grew up, learned, and loved. It was where I felt safe and secure. It was home. And now, it's just gone. Sold to someone else, without a second thought for the memories held within its walls. That's why the wall is going up. The day I left for college, Mom cried. Dad gave me a big hug and told me to study hard. I promised I would, waving goodbye as they stood on the porch, watching my beat-up Honda Civic disappear down the street. Little did I know, that goodbye was more significant than I realized. It was the beginning of the end of an era. What I didn't know was that after I left, sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by my absence, my parents began to talk. It's just so big, Rebecca, I can imagine Dad saying, pushing his cereal bowl around the table. Now that Chloe's gone, it's just the two of us rattling around in this place. Mom would likely agree, sipping her coffee and looking around at the high ceilings and empty rooms. It is a lot to take care of, John. The yard work alone is exhausting. And the taxes are so high. We could downsize, Dad might suggest, his eyes lighting up a little. Find a smaller place, maybe closer to town. Something easier to manage. And think of the money we'd save, Mom would add, her practical side kicking in. We could finally take that trip to Europe we've always talked about. The conversation would continue like this for weeks, maybe months. Weighing the pros and cons, the memories against the realities of maintaining such a large property. I picture them walking through the empty house, room by room, seeing it not as a home filled with love and laughter, but as a burden. A burden they were ready to shed. That's how it started. With a conversation, a seed planted in their minds. A seed that would eventually grow into a decision that would change everything. A decision that would lead to a wall. The downsizing conversation soon evolved. It wasn't just about finding a smaller place, it was about finding the right buyer. And that's when the developers came knocking. A sleek, black car pulled up to the curb one afternoon. A man in a sharp suit, Mr. Henderson, emerged, briefcase in hand. He walked up to the front door, a confident smile on his face. He wasn't interested in a cozy family home, he was interested in land. Prime real estate. Mr. Henderson represented a development company eager to build a new housing complex. Our property, with its large lot and convenient location, was perfect. He offered my parents a sum of money that made their eyes widen. It was more than they could have ever imagined. Suddenly, downsizing wasn't just about convenience, it was about striking it rich. They could pay off their mortgage, invest for retirement, and yes, even take that trip to Europe. The possibilities seemed endless. The allure of the money was strong. It clouded their judgment, blinding them to the emotional value of the house. They saw dollar signs, not memories. They saw a chance to secure their future, not a betrayal of their past. So, they signed the papers. They shook hands with Mr. Henderson. They agreed to sell our family home to a developer, knowing full well that it would likely be torn down and replaced with something cold and impersonal. And they did it all without telling me. Because sometimes, the promise of big money can make people do things they never thought they were capable of. And sometimes, those things can build walls, both real and imagined. I was scrolling through Zillow, something I did maybe once a month, just to see what was happening in my hometown. I missed it sometimes, the quiet streets and familiar faces. I definitely missed the oak tree. That's when I saw it. The picture jumped out at me. The blue Victorian with the wraparound porch. Our house. But something was different. There was a big, red sold banner plastered across the image. My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked on the listing, my hands shaking. The description confirmed my worst fears. Charming Victorian home, perfect for redevelopment. Redevelopment? That meant tearing it down. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The world seemed to spin around me. How could they? How could they sell our house, our memories, without even telling me? I grabbed my phone and called my mom. It rang and rang, finally going to voicemail. I left a message, my voice trembling. Mom, it's me. Chloe. I saw the listing online. About the house. Please call me back. Hours passed. No call. I tried my dad. Same thing. Voicemail. More questions, more panic. The silence was deafening. The realization that they had intentionally kept this from me was crushing. It felt like a betrayal, a deep wound that cut right to my core. That night, I didn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying memories in my head, each one now tainted by the knowledge that they were gone. Erased. Sold for a profit. The pain was unbearable. That's when I knew I couldn't just let it go. I had to do something. I had to make them understand the depth of my hurt. That's when the idea of the wall started to form. Sleep deprived and fueled by anger, I started digging. I needed to understand the details of the sale, the developer's plans, anything that could help me make sense of this mess. That's when I stumbled upon something interesting in the county records. The developer, Mr. Henderson, needed access to our property to begin construction. Seems simple enough, right? But here's the catch: the most direct access route ran through a small, oddly shaped plot of land right next door. A plot of land that, for years, had been owned by a grumpy old man named Mr. Abernathy, who refused to sell to anyone. I remembered Mr. Abernathy. He was always tending his garden, a grumpy but harmless neighbor. But Mr. Abernathy had passed away a few months ago, and I decided to investigate. I did some more digging online and discovered that his property was now listed for sale. A light bulb went off in my head. If I bought that land, the access road, I would essentially have the developer, and therefore my parents, over a barrel. Without access, the developer's plans would be stalled. The value of my parents' property would plummet. It was a risky move, and it would cost me a significant chunk of my savings. But the thought of having that kind of leverage, of being able to control the situation, was intoxicating. It was a way to fight back, to make them understand the consequences of their actions. The wall wouldn't just be a symbol of my anger, it would be a strategic move. A way to protect myself, and maybe, just maybe, teach my parents a lesson. The plan was starting to take shape. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I contacted a real estate agent, secured a loan, and made an offer on Mr. Abernathy's property. I kept everything a secret, not wanting my parents to suspect a thing. The thought of their faces when they found out fueled me through the stress and paperwork. Finally, the day arrived. I signed the closing documents, and just like that, I was the owner of the access road. It was a small victory, but a significant one. I felt a surge of power, a sense of control I hadn't felt since discovering their betrayal. Now, for the revenge. The wall was the key. It had to be big, imposing, and completely block the view from their future, downsized dream home. I started researching construction companies, getting quotes, and drawing up plans. I wanted something that would send a clear message: you can't erase the past, and you can't ignore the consequences of your actions. I imagined my parents' reaction. The shock, the anger, the realization that I had outsmarted them. It was a childish fantasy, maybe, but it gave me a sense of satisfaction. I knew it was a drastic measure, but I felt justified. They had hurt me deeply, and I needed them to understand the extent of that hurt. The wall wasn't just about blocking their view, it was about building a boundary. A boundary between their actions and my forgiveness. A boundary that they would have to acknowledge before we could even begin to repair our relationship. The construction plans were drawn. It was time to build. The construction began early one morning. I stood across the street, watching as the heavy machinery rumbled into place. The crew started digging, laying the foundation for my masterpiece of passive aggression. The wall was designed to be imposing. 12 feet high and 50 feet long, a solid barrier of gray concrete. It wasn't just a wall, it was a statement. It was a physical representation of the distance that had grown between me and my parents. As the wall went up, brick by brick, I could almost feel the view disappearing. The sunny backyard, the rolling hills in the distance, all gone. Replaced by a cold, unyielding surface. I made sure it was positioned perfectly to block the view from the main windows of the house, the living room and the master bedroom. Every morning, they would wake up and see it. Every evening, they would be reminded of my presence, my anger, my pain. The neighbors started to stare. They whispered among themselves, wondering what I was building and why. I didn't care. I was focused on the task at hand, determined to see my plan through to the end. The construction took several days, and with each passing hour, the wall grew taller and more formidable. It loomed over the property, a stark reminder of the broken relationship that had led to its creation. It was ugly, yes, but it was also powerful. It was my way of reclaiming my voice, of making myself heard. It was my wall. And it was finally complete. Now, all that was left was to wait for my parents to see it. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my mom. "Chloe Vance, what in the world is going on over there?" Her voice was tight with anger. I could practically feel the heat radiating through the phone. "Good morning, Mom," I said, trying to sound calm, though my heart was pounding. "What do you mean? Don't play coy with me. There's a monstrosity blocking our view. A giant wall. What did you do?" "Oh, that?" I replied, feigning surprise. "That's just a little something I decided to build on my property." "Your property? What property?" "You didn't." Her voice trailed off, and I could hear my dad yelling in the background. "John, she bought Abernathy's land." "You bought that land?" My dad's voice boomed through the phone. "Why would you do something like that? Maybe because you sold my childhood home without telling me?" I snapped, my carefully constructed composure finally cracking. "Maybe because you prioritized money over family? Maybe because I felt like I deserved a little say in what happens to the place where I grew up." There was silence on the other end of the line, a stunned silence that was almost as satisfying as seeing the wall itself. Then, my mom spoke again, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "How could you do this to us, Chloe? After everything we've done for you? You want to know how I could do this?" I said, my voice rising. "Come over and take a look at the wall. It's a pretty good representation of how I feel right now." And with that, I hung up. I knew the confrontation was coming, and I was ready. Or at least, I hoped I was. About an hour later, their car screeched to a halt in front of my property. My parents stormed out, their faces red with anger. "Chloe, what is the meaning of this?" Dad yelled, gesturing wildly at the wall. "This is insane. Insane is selling my childhood home behind my back." I retorted, meeting his gaze. "Insane is not even having the decency to tell me before you ripped a huge piece of my heart out." "We needed the money, Chloe," Mom cried, her voice cracking. "We're not getting any younger, and we have to think about our future." "And what about my future?" I shot back. "What about the memories I have in that house? What about the fact that it was supposed to be a place I could always come home to?" "You have your own life, Chloe," Dad said, his voice softening slightly. "You have your own apartment, your own friends. You don't need that old house anymore." "It's not about needing it, Dad," I exclaimed, tears welling up in my eyes. "It's about wanting it. It's about the fact that you didn't even consider how I would feel. You just made a decision that affected my life without even consulting me." "We didn't want to burden you," Mom said, her voice barely a whisper. "We didn't want to ask you for money." "Burden me?" I scoffed. "You think telling me you were selling the house would have been a burden? It would have been a conversation. It would have been showing me some respect." The air crackled with unspoken words, with years of pent-up emotions finally spilling out into the open. The wall stood between us, a silent witness to our pain. "You don't understand," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "It's not just about the house. It's about the fact that you didn't trust me enough to include me in this decision. It's about feeling like I'm not a part of this family anymore." "That's not true, Chloe," Mom said, reaching out to touch my arm. I flinched away. "Then why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why did I have to find out online, like some stranger?" "We were afraid," Dad admitted, looking down at the ground. "We were afraid you'd try to talk us out of it. We knew how much that house meant to you. So, instead of talking to me, you just went behind my back and did what you wanted." I asked, incredulous. That's not how families are supposed to work. We thought we were doing what was best for everyone, Mom said, her eyes filled with tears. We thought you would understand. Understand? How could I understand when you didn't even give me a chance? I cried. You made a major life decision that affected me, and you didn't even bother to consider my feelings. That's not love, Mom. That's not family. That's betrayal. I turned away from them, unable to bear the sight of their faces any longer. The wall loomed behind me, a stark reminder of the chasm that had opened up between us. I felt a deep sense of sadness, a profound sense of loss. Not just for the house, but for the family I thought we were. The betrayal cut deep. Chloe, please try to see this from our perspective, Mom pleaded, stepping closer. We're not getting any younger. That house was becoming too much to handle. The upkeep, the taxes, it was draining us. We wanted to secure our future, Dad added, his voice filled with a weary resignation. We wanted to make sure we had enough money to retire comfortably, to travel, to enjoy life without worrying about every penny. And what about enjoying life with your daughter? I asked, turning back to face them. What about the memories we could have made in that house? What about the traditions we could have continued? We thought we could make new memories, Mom said, her voice softening. We thought we could visit you more often, maybe even take you on that trip to Europe with us. But you didn't even ask me if I wanted to go, I pointed out. You just assumed that money would solve everything. You assumed that a trip to Europe could replace a lifetime of memories. We just wanted to make things easier, Dad said, his voice laced with frustration. We thought you would understand that we were doing this for ourselves, for our future. And what about me? I asked, my voice trembling. What about my future? What about my feelings? Did you even consider those? They looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. I could see the guilt in their eyes, the realization that they had made a mistake. But it was too late. The house was gone, the wall was up, and the damage was done. The money was a factor in their decision. Security was too. But they went about it the wrong way. Oh, I understand more than you think, I said, a hint of steel in my voice. I know all about Mr. Henderson and his plans for a new housing complex. I know that you sold our house for a lot of money, money that you thought would solve all your problems. My parents exchanged a nervous glance. How did you? Mom started to ask, but I cut her off. I did my research, I said, smirking slightly. And I also know that Mr. Henderson needs access to your property to start building. And guess who owns that access road now? I paused for effect, letting the information sink in. Their eyes widened in disbelief. You mean, you bought Abernathy's land knowing about the developer? Dad asked, his voice filled with a mixture of shock and anger. That's right, I said, nodding slowly. I own the only way in and out of your little gold mine. Without my permission, Mr. Henderson can't build anything. Which means your property is essentially worthless. The color drained from my mom's face. Chloe, you wouldn't. Wouldn't I? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You sold my childhood home without telling me. You prioritized money over family. Why wouldn't I protect myself? Why wouldn't I make sure you understood the consequences of your actions? I had their attention now. The anger had been replaced by fear, by the realization that I held all the cards. The wall wasn't just a symbol of my pain, it was a strategic move, a power play that had completely changed the game. The twist was now revealed. The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the distant chirping of birds. My parents stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and something else, something that almost looked like understanding. You mean? Mom said slowly, her voice barely a whisper. All that money, it's all for nothing now? Not necessarily, I said, a flicker of hope igniting within me. It depends on what you're willing to do. Dad ran a hand through his hair, his face etched with worry. What do you want, Chloe? What can we do to fix this? Fix it? I asked, scoffing slightly. You can't fix what you've already broken. But maybe we can find a way to move forward. I watched as the realization of their situation washed over them. They had been so focused on the money, on their own future, that they hadn't stopped to consider the consequences of their actions. They hadn't stopped to think about how their decision would affect me. And now, they were facing the consequences. For the first time since finding out about the sale, I saw a glimmer of understanding in their eyes. They finally realized the depth of my pain, the extent of my betrayal. The wall, which had initially been a symbol of my anger, was now a tool for communication, a way to force them to confront the truth. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something new. A chance to rebuild our relationship, to bridge the gap that had formed between us. But it wouldn't be easy. They knew what was at stake now. I'm not going to let Mr. Henderson build on that property unless you agree to something, I said, my voice firm but measured. I'm not doing this just for myself. I'm doing this because I believe in giving back to the community. What do you have in mind? Dad asked, his eyes narrowed slightly. I want you to donate a portion of the money you're getting from the developer to the local children's hospital, I said, watching their reactions carefully. They're always in need of funding, and it would be a way to turn this whole mess into something positive. My parents looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, weighing the pros and cons. How much are we talking about? Mom asked, her voice cautious. 20%, I said, holding my breath. 20% of the total sale price. It was a significant amount of money, but I knew they could afford it. And I knew that it would be a meaningful contribution to the community. That's a lot, Chloe, Dad said, his brow furrowed. It is, I agreed. But it's also the right thing to do. It's a way to show that you're not just motivated by greed, that you actually care about something other than yourselves. It's a way to start making amends for what you've done. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. The fate of our relationship, the future of the developer deal, all hung in the balance. I had offered them a compromise, a chance to redeem themselves. It was up to them to decide whether or not they were willing to take it. The ball was now in their court. After what felt like an eternity, Dad sighed and nodded. All right, Chloe, he said, his voice heavy with resignation. We'll do it. We'll donate 20% to the children's hospital. Mom nodded in agreement, though her face still looked pained. We know it's not going to fix everything, she said, but we're willing to try. We're willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful that it almost knocked me off my feet. I had expected them to fight me, to argue, to refuse to give up such a large sum of money. But they had surprised me. They had actually listened. Thank you, I said, my voice choked with emotion. Thank you for doing this. It means more to me than you know. So, does that mean you'll let Mr. Henderson have access to the property? Dad asked, his voice laced with a hint of hope. Yes, I said, nodding. I'll sign the paperwork. I'll give him the access he needs. But the wall stays. My parents looked at the wall, its imposing presence a stark reminder of everything that had happened. They seemed to understand that it was more than just a barrier, it was a symbol of our journey, a testament to the pain and the healing that had taken place. All right, Dad said, sighing again. The wall stays. With that, a tentative truce was declared. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. We had taken the first step towards reconciliation, but there was still a long road ahead. Still, it was a start. A glimmer of hope in the face of what felt like an insurmountable challenge. The parents agreed, but reluctantly. The wall remained standing, a solid gray presence in the landscape. But its meaning had shifted. It was no longer just a symbol of anger and betrayal. It had become something more complex, something more nuanced. It was a boundary, a clear line drawn in the sand. A reminder that actions have consequences, that trust is earned, not given. It was a testament to the pain I had felt, and a declaration that I would no longer be taken for granted. But it was also a lesson learned. A lesson about the importance of communication, about the need to value family over money, about the power of forgiveness. It was a reminder that even the most broken relationships can be mended, if both parties are willing to put in the effort. The wall wouldn't disappear overnight. It would continue to loom over the property, a constant reminder of the past. But with each passing day, its edges would soften. Its harshness would fade. And eventually, it would become a symbol of something else entirely, a symbol of resilience, of growth, and of the enduring power of love. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be setbacks, arguments, and moments of doubt. But I also knew that we were capable of overcoming anything, as long as we were willing to work together. The wall was a reminder of our past, but it was also a promise of our future. A future where communication and honesty would reign supreme. A future where family would always come first. The wall stood, but it had a new meaning. In the weeks that followed, things slowly began to change. My parents called more often, not just to talk about the weather or their doctor's appointments, but to actually ask about my life. They wanted to know about my job, my friends, my hopes and dreams. We started having Sunday dinners again, but this time, the conversation felt different. It was more open, more honest. We talked about the house, about the sale, about the wall. We acknowledged the pain and the hurt, and we started to forgive each other. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, moments of anger, moments of doubt. But we persevered. We kept talking, kept listening, kept trying to understand each other's perspectives. My parents even started volunteering at the children's hospital, helping to raise money and spending time with the kids. They told me that it had been a life-changing experience, that it had given them a new sense of purpose. I knew that our relationship would never be exactly the same. The sale of the house had left a scar, a permanent reminder of the betrayal. But we were learning to live with it, to move forward, to build a new foundation based on trust and communication. The wall was still there, but it no longer felt like such a barrier. It had become a part of the landscape, a reminder of our journey. And as time went on, it even started to feel almost comforting. A symbol of the strength and resilience of our family. We were working towards a better future. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that the wall was more than just a symbol of my anger. It was a catalyst for change. It forced us to confront our issues, to communicate openly and honestly, and to rebuild our relationship from the ground up. I learned that communication is key to any successful relationship, whether it's with your parents, your friends, or your partner. Without open and honest communication, misunderstandings can fester, resentment can build, and eventually, walls can start to go up. I also learned that family is the most important thing in the world. They're the people who love you unconditionally, who support you through thick and thin, who are always there for you, no matter what. And sometimes, even when they make mistakes, they deserve a second chance. It's not always easy to forgive, especially when you've been deeply hurt. But holding on to anger and resentment only hurts yourself in the long run. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, a way to release the pain and move on. The experience with my parents taught me a valuable lesson about the importance of valuing people over possessions. Money can come and go, but relationships are forever. And at the end of the day, it's the love and support of your family that truly matters. The whole experience changed me. I see things differently now. The wall was a reminder of the past, but it was also a symbol of hope for the future. A future where communication, forgiveness, and love would always prevail. And that was a future worth fighting for. I understood now what truly mattered in life. One sunny afternoon, I found myself standing at the base of the wall. It still loomed large, but it didn't feel as intimidating as it once did. I had a shovel in my hand and a bag of flower seeds at my feet. I had decided to plant a garden at the base of the wall, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. I carefully dug holes in the soil, scattering the seeds and watering them gently. I chose a mix of colorful wildflowers, hoping that their beauty would soften the harshness of the concrete. As I worked, I thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the anger, the betrayal, the forgiveness. It had been a long and difficult journey, but we had made it through. And now, we were stronger than ever. My parents even came by to help. We worked side by side, planting flowers and sharing stories. It was a simple act, but it felt incredibly meaningful. It was a symbol of our commitment to each other, a promise to never let money or possessions come between us again. As the sun began to set, we stood back to admire our work. The wall was still there, but it was now adorned with a vibrant tapestry of color. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, their beauty a testament to the power of hope and healing. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The future was uncertain, but I knew that we could face anything, as long as we had each other. The wall would always be a part of our story, but it would no longer define us. We had learned from our mistakes, and we were ready to move forward, together. Thank you for spending your time with my story. Feel free to share your thoughts or reactions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.